Thank you. If you're just tuning in, you're watching a live webcast with Mr. Lyndon LaRouche. Now, just to emphasize what Mr. LaRouche just said, I would call our viewers' attention to some very significant events that happened in Washington over the past 48 hours. Number one, yesterday, two hearings that took place in the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee and the House Foreign Affairs Committee, particularly the one in the House, in which some very uncomfortable questions began to be raised, which were directly affected by the fact sheet that EIR and LaRouche PAC were circulating. And then also just a few hours ago, a press conference that took place on the Senate side featuring Senators McCain, Graham, and Kelly Ayotte, in which McCain asked the question, what did Obama know and when did he know it? So with that said, I'll bring Dennis Mason up to the podium to begin our questions. Dennis is an editor with LaRouchePAC.com, and he's going to pose the first question.
Okay. So as Matt said, the other day there was a hearing a congressional hearing on the State Department Accountability Board report, the so-called Pickering report. And there was really a potential for a lot of fight coming out of this thing. What was clear was that the unclassified section of that report has far less actionable intelligence than our own updated fact sheet, which Matt just mentioned. And we put that together all with material from the public domain. So now, we had saturated the hearing as well as D.C. generally with the fact sheet leading into this. And at that hearing, there were comments from several different representatives saying that the report was far too narrow. What needs to be addressed are the policy decisions which created the environment in which 9/11 at Benghazi occurred. For the first time, there were questions raised about the military which provided security for the Benghazi mission. And their relationship to al-Qaeda. For the first time, there were questions asked about whether the Obama administration had used Qatar as a proxy for supplying jihadists in Libya with weapons, whether those weapons were used in the attack in Benghazi, and whether those weapons are going to al-Qaeda in Syria today. So the potential for a real breakout has been created. It's visible in the Congress. Now, along with this, as Matt again mentioned at the beginning of this broadcast, there was a press conference with Representatives Jones and Rangel regarding an open letter that both of them have sent to President Obama, warning him not to repeat the illegal invasion in Libya in terms of going into Syria without congressional report or congressional authority. And it's interesting because both of these representatives are distinguished, but they've both been chastised by their own parties. Rangel was, Obama told him to just retire in this last election cycle. Mr. Jones was removed from the Financial Services Committee by his leadership. So both of these representatives have failed to go along to get along. So the question that I have is that, even in the face of the party politics, like you have the whole Kerry process, which is going, so the party politics is still there. We have, as you've identified, an increasing revolt in D.C., which you've catalyzed and we've catalyzed with our national activities. So there's a potential for a real explosion. So if you would, I'd like you to speak to that, speak to the strategic thinking and leadership that's required for this end of the party system.
Well, first of all, you've got to realize that the principle of leadership applies. Do not take the total population and assume that the total population is the democratic voice. It is not. Most people in this nation have no conception whatsoever of what the solution might be to the present problems. And you would have a great educational job to try to get them ever to understand that. However, you have a number of a certain layer of the population, which is a small, within the 10%, top 10% level, of people who do have two things. They tend to be well-informed, not always perfectly, but well-informed, relatively speaking. and they have the guts to speak up. And this is understandable if you look at the way that our population has been handled. We have very relatively mass insanity, which has grown up since the death of Kennedy, assassination of Kennedy. We've had mass insanity build up step by step. You have a very large, some people say 40% of young people are in some category of insanity. What happened in Connecticut, for example, was a case of insanity. And that's how it happened. And nobody was watching the switch on a case that was about to freak out and do something like that which happened. So the responsibility for this so-called tragedy, the responsibility lies with the institutions of government of the United States, which no longer do anything about mental instability. And you had this young fellow, the so-called perpetrator, who was in a breakdown situation. But this is only typical of the potential breakout of homicidal insanity in people. Since when? Since Kennedy was assassinated. What happened if you look back about 2 years after the assassination of Kennedy, and you will find that the drug and insanity business was launched then. And in 1968, you had the march of mass insanity, a real fascism, the worst kind of fascism, of the Hitler variety. And since that time, the rate of insanity, has increased. One factor, of course, is not only the drugs themselves, the drug factor, but the fact that the drug factor was correlated with the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War was the greatest promotion of drug trafficking in the United States in that period, and since that time. So you have to look at factors, not general census of population. Yes, the whole population will be affected by it, but the whole population will be affected by leadership. That the ability of the population to function depends upon leadership, and also, of course, response among the general population to this kind of leadership. Now, what we've seen is the senior figure from the Senate who's leading this issue, in discussion of this issue, is willing to fight. And I've been watching this closely. Will he stay willing to fight? Or will he cave in? And there's pressure in the Republican Party as well as others for him to cave in. But we see also a march, step by step, where this is breaking down. The mystique of President Obama is no more. In the leading circles, among the people who make a difference, the people who have the guts and knowledge to fight. And when they start to fight, even though they be a minority, even though they be less than 10% of the population, their decision to do that can bring about exactly what is needed. It's all there. That's why I say today, as I said in presentation, there are certain things which you can be optimistic about. The developments in a trend of developments which go in the direction of accomplishment. But I would look at things like McCain, and does McCain stay with the program, so to speak? Then you look at the British bankers who come up with the Glass-Steagall line. They're right. They're absolutely correct. This is the interest of the people of England and Scotland and so forth. It is their interest. And on that, we have no difference with them. That's their right. That's what they need. They have a right to it. They have my sympathy on that account. But so therefore, that's the issue. We have the people with the guts and knowledge to be able to provide a leadership. If it means as much as 5 or 10% of the population, that's enough. That's enough. Because the rest of the population will take courage from seeing a leadership of people who know what they're talking about, coming forth and presenting in various kinds of fora, presenting the case for Glass-Steagall, why you must have Glass-Steagall. What is Glass-Steagall? What does it mean? What's it going to do for you? What about your jobs? What about your health care? What about these things? In other words, once you get the thing rolling, if it starts to roll, we have all the preconditions particularly the fact. The fact is established that the President of the United States is an agent of Al-Qaeda or a participant in Al-Qaeda, which is pretty much the same thing. And when people realize that this is 9/11, Mr. 9/11 President, that's what it is. And this was run by a Saudi-British operation. That's who set it up. And you take the Bush family, the Bush League of 2 terms, and this thing of Obama, you've got 3 terms of president, already recently completed, or almost completed. 3 terms of president, not fit for human company.